to
benefits.
subsidize birth control for lower income people. That's why.
Then why is it only their community, the black community, that saw a spike in the single motherhood rate?
Because they don't have the same access to it because they've been written out of those
laws. But weren't Asian Americans written out of the laws in the 1940s and 50s?
No, because they are not black.
Oh, okay, so it's only black people that experienced a tough 20th century.
No, I'm talking about black people that were specifically written out of these laws.
Asian Americans were written out of laws in the 1940s. We put Asian Americans in internment camps.
I understand.
So it's so what you could.
That?
I'm sorry.
You did that?
Well, California Democrats did that in the 1940s under the direction of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Switched positions on those ideas. Did you take U.S. history?
Yeah, I did. That is one of the biggest lies ever taught in U.S. history, and we could talk about that. So, right, despite
So many black fathers were being sent to prison.
and it was only black communities doing cocaine. It wasn't Hispanic communities or Asian American communities or white American communities doing crack cocaine.
Demographics for those communities.
The cocaine
Don't just
epidemic.
focus on black single motherhood.
Are you triggered, by the way?
Oh yeah.
Well, we're off to a great start. 16 seconds in and the first signs of a meltdown are already there. It's almost impressive how quickly some folks can turn into frustration when faced with very inconvenient questions. Charlie Kirk asks a very simple one. If the Constitution was designed to benefit only a certain group of people, then how come Asian Americans are leading the wealth game? Spoiler alert, it's not because they've got special privileges of some kind, it's because they are focused on education and hard work. Let's ignore all that and get mad instead. Classic move. Let's look into this very interesting debate and analyze it together.
If the Constitution was written to benefit only white people, why is it that Asian Americans are the richest people by race in America right now?
Because the Constitution wasn't written to make people rich.
Was the Constitution written in Korean?
The Constitution was written to make people slaves.
Yeah, yet Korean Americans and Vietnamese are actually benefiting the greatest from this American experiment.
Actually, in California, as a direct result of Asian success, there were laws passed that stopped Asian Americans, or Asians period, Asian immigrants, from being able to become citizens or own land.
Chinese Exclusion Act, you don't recall
of
history
Asian
lessons?
success. So no, like structurally there have been many roadblocks.
So you're proving my point precisely?
No, I'm not.
So your point is that we were racist against Asian Americans and now they're the richest in America, so they went through a vast time of inequities and they rose above it and they're much richer per income and wealth than white Americans.
No, that happens because Americans realized that they f***ed up and they lost all of the labor that was going to be possible for people to work on farms in California in order to exploit the land that was in California. There was no way for them to have people to work there, and that's why they brought immigrants back. That's why.
So what social program was designed?
Literally built on our backs.
That again, swearing and saying things like that doesn't make your argument any more valid. But
okay, but it helps me take out a little bit of my anger.
That's fair.
Which is valid for me to do.
Then if it was rigged for a specific group of people, Asian Americans are the richest by race. The second are Indian Americans, people from India. And the third would be white Americans.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Yeah, so how is why is that?
How do you feel about phrenology?
What are you saying about racial inequality then on the other side?
So why? No, but explain to me why that is. I could tell you why it is though.
Maybe the top 1 or 5% are the richest. What about the global South? What about the poverty? What about the lowest?
What about okay, so let's talk about
the lowest 50%. What are
in America
their,
or globally?
Yeah, no, in America. And globally, as well
Okay.
as globally. What's their racial background?
Well,
What's the racial demographic of that? Mostly people of color, not white people.
But the Asian Americans are at the top of the socioeconomic ladder relatively.
A very small number.
No, in the aggregate. In the aggregate. If you look at the way the data is compiled and presented to us, they are the richest per capita group by race in America. Why? Because over the last 50 years, Asian Americans graduated from high school in record numbers. They did not commit crimes.
Because we're smarter than you. Sorry.
Oh, okay. That's that's a racist argument you just made.
Okay.
I'm not going to get into eugenics, but you just said you're smarter. I don't think that. I don't think any race is smarter.
There are other races that haven't done what you're describing.
Because
okay,
the two groups that are poorest by race in America are Native American Indians and African Americans. We've done the most to try to help them over the last 50, 60 years. We have the Bureau of Native American Affairs in the federal government. We spent $22 trillion in the federal government trying to help Black America, and Black America is poorer today than before we tried to start to help them. $22 trillion.
Racism that just exists in the system.
Okay, so your argument, institutional racism. My argument is failed policies that Lyndon Baines Johnson, a bitter and committed racist, you and I will both agree, and a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat who didn't want to sign the Civil Rights Act, passed the Great Society, which clustered.
Do you think JFK was going to sign the Civil Rights Act?
Well, he wanted to before he was.
He was certainly not going to.
So you're right. The Democrats were opposed to it. You're right.
Oh, no,
the Northeast Democrats.
LBJ was definitely for it because he was from South Texas.
So what did he call the Great Society bill?
Oh no, LBJ was a racist because he was an old white man.
Are all white people racist?
I would say that I think.
Alright, let's dive into this, shall we? So Charlie Kirk kicks things off by pointing out something that apparently is as shocking as finding out that the sky is blue. Asian Americans are on average the richest and wealthiest group in the whole US, at least when it comes to income, and you can almost hear the collective gasp from the crowd. The question that follows is, how is this possible, especially if the system is so inherently racist against them? Well, let's unpack that. First of all, let's remember that systematic racism has a very long history, one and only factor that shapes economic outcomes. One of the key factors Kirk brings up is the education piece, which, surprise, is a huge driver of economic mobility. According to the National Center of Education Statistics, Asian Americans have the highest high school graduation rates, which is around the 90th percentile, and one of the highest rates of bachelor's degree attainment. In fact, about 54% of Asian Americans hold at least a bachelor's degree, which is far above the national average of only 40%. And this is a very huge indicator for success, and it's not just about privilege, it's about prioritizing education, which is often within family structures that heavily value it. I mean, who doesn't know this one Asian guy in his friend group that's incredibly good at math and can basically explain anything better than the professor at university? Shocking, I know, but hey, just don't take my word for it. Let's take a quick look at some numbers. According to the US Census, Asian Americans have also the highest median household income of any racial group, topping $87,000 per year compared to $70,000 for white Americans. Now, this is a generalization, and yes, there's a variation with every group. For example, Indian Americans tend to have even higher incomes when certain Southeast Asian communities may struggle more. But in aggregate, this is the trend that we can see. Now, some of the folks in the audience might be really triggered by this because it doesn't fit in the usual narrative that racism is the sole cause of inequality. And that's where things get a little fun. Kirk brings up the fact that the Asian immigrant story in America has its own unique history, and guess what? It hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows for them. Asian immigrants faced significant discrimination, including restrictive immigration laws in the early 20th century and forced internment during World War II. Yet, despite these hurdles, many of these groups have managed to climb the socio-economic ladder, in part because of a laser focus on education and family structure, not some magical race-based policy or mysterious special treatment. But hey, that doesn't stop some of them from clinging to the idea that white people are the only ones benefiting from the American system. So let's give this a very quick reality check, and who could be better for doing this than a white person himself. If the system was truly based to solely benefit white people, why are some immigrant groups like Asian Americans and Indian Americans, for the matter of fact, not only succeeding but also thriving? These are not communities that were designed to success in America, and they were actively excluded from many opportunities in the past. Yet, here they are doing better than the national average. And while we're at it, let's throw in another tidbit of data just for kicks. According to Pew Research, Asian Americans have the highest rates of marriage and family stability among all racial groups, with 69% of Asian American adults being married compared to 53% of white Americans. Family structure plays a very huge role in shaping economic outcomes. A stable household with two involved parents provides more opportunities for children to succeed, whether they are studying for school or having access to better resources. In other words, Asian Americans aren't heavily benefiting from some hidden systematic advantage, like many people suppose. They are benefiting from the tried and true principles of hard work, family cohesion, and an emphasis on education. So to recap, the Asian American success story isn't some myth or an outlier. It's grounded in the same principles that many American families have relied on for many generations: education, family support, and willingness to climb despite massive adversities. The argument that the system is somehow rigged against people of color because they don't have a leg up falls flat when you consider the successes of immigrants who have faced far worse than most will ever even know. But don't worry folks, there's still plenty of time to get mad about it. Just remember, data and facts don't tend to care about your feelings when they contradict your narrative. Oh, and for the record, this doesn't mean that there aren't issues to address with inequality or systematic problems in other areas, but let's at least get the basic facts right before we can go on a rant about who's winning in America.
You can argue with me. I think white people have social bias.
Do you understand how racist it is to think that all white people are racist?
We don't experience systematic racism. We don't experience racism when we try and
Okay.
Power structures.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So then how did Asian Americans climb up the power structure?
That has nothing.
I just did.
No, can anyone explain that to me? Because I can't.
I'll explain it. All Asian, most Asian Americans here. Okay, you said Native Americans, Black Americans
Are the two
they're
poorest by race.
I know.
That's
what
inarguable.
keeps them in common? Okay,
What keeps them in common?
They've been here for a while.
Okay, so you know what
Native
keeps them in
Americans-
common?
Yeah.
They also
I'll
get the
explain.
most
Okay.
government benefits per capita than any other group in America, because the way government programs are.
That's a symptom, not a cause.
No. And you can go to almost a direct date. Black America is poorer today than before we started helping Black America. The welfare
It's like by
programs.
helping even by desegregating. I don't think that's much help.
Okay, so how about this? The black single motherhood rate in year 1964 was 22%. Now it's 74%. How on earth does that happen? It happens because we subsidized single motherhood through the 70s, 80s, and 90s by saying if you get married, you lose your government benefits.
Birth control for lower income people. That's why.
Then why is it only their community, the black community, that saw a spike in the single motherhood rate?
Because
They're
they
the
don't
lowest
have the
income.
same access to it because they've been written out of those
But
laws.
weren't Asian Americans written out of the laws in the 1940s and
No,
50s?
because they are not black.
Oh, okay, so it's only black people that experienced the tough 20th century.
No, I'm talking about black people that were specifically written out of these laws.
Asian Americans were written out of laws in the 1940s.
I
We put
understand.
Asian Americans in internment camps.
I understand.
So so what you
did
could.
that?
I'm sorry.
You did that?
Well, California Democrats did that in the 1940s under the direction of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Switched positions on those ideas. Did you take U.S. history?
Yeah, I did. That is one of the biggest lies ever taught in U.S. history, and we could talk about that. So, Democrats have always been about control and always been about power. That is the continuity. Republicans have always been about freedom. The Republican Party was founded in 1860 as an anti-slavery. Freedom for all people. The Republican Party was founded as an anti-slavery party for rights of all Americans in 1860, founded in Ripon, Wisconsin, and it has not changed. It has always been about the equality and freedom of all people. The Democrat Party has always been about division.
What do you think about the war on drugs that the Republican
No, I
Party
actually would have more sympathy with you about decriminalizing marijuana and the war on drugs. So. Yeah, I know it's funny to believe in freedom, but
How come whenever we bring up
War on
something,
drugs. How is that about freedom?
I'm sorry.
But like Reagan was one of the biggest proponents of the war on drugs. How is that freedom? How is that pro-freedom?
Again, it was a bipartisan agreement, but I would agree. I think that's a valid point.
how come every single thing?
I think it's Well, I mean, I know it might amaze you to say that I actually said you made a valid point that Republicans have been hypocrites on the war on drugs over the last 30, 40 years.
But then can you also
Okay.
recognize that the war on drugs disproportionately hurt people of color, and that's one of the reasons why they haven't experienced the economic gains that you say everybody should have experienced?
So how big of a reason do you think that contributed to the rising single motherhood rate in urban
Pretty
communities?
significantly.
I mean,
So many
if the
people
dad's
with
in jail,
mental
then
illness
So why is it only their community that saw the spike in single motherhood
Because
rate?
crack
Despite
So many
Has
black
a-
fathers were being sent to prison.
and it was only black communities doing cocaine. It wasn't Hispanic communities or Asian American communities or white American communities doing crack cocaine.
Demographics for those communities.
The cocaine
Don't just
epidemic.
focus on black single motherhood.
Are you triggered, by the way?
We've all seen you be triggered on YouTube as well, so don't act like yelling and being upset is something independent to people on the left.
Well, I get yelled at more than that.
Dude,
But anyway.
Congress sort of 100 to 1.
But let me ask you a question. The crack cocaine epidemic in the 1980s hit all communities. It hit the black community the worst, but it hit all communities.
Yeah, so
Correct?
it hit all communities, but the black community the worst. Okay, so how come Congress threw a 100 to 1 sentencing disparity?
No,
with,
again, you're going to
crack
find
cocaine
you're going to find sympathy with me in the drug law argument. But what you're not going to find sympathy is that we continually subsidize through these welfare programs and then broken public schools. We can get into that, which is a complete relationship with the Democrat Party and the cartel, which is public sector teacher unions. That does not allow good teachers to be paid more and bad teachers to be fired. Yes, the public sector teacher union is a cartel.
Okay. So you're saying
It's
teachers are
advocating
paid
for
too
public
much?
sector teachers.
I'm sorry?
You're saying teachers are paid too
No,
much?
teachers should be paid more and bad teachers should be fired. Under the current way the tenure laws are written and the agreement between the state government of Texas or the state government of Kansas and the public sector teacher unions, bad teachers cannot be fired. It's nearly
Why don't
impossible
we
to
talk
fire
about
them.
police unions?
Who
Police
owns
unions
the
are
public
cartels.
education system in Texas?
Democrats.
Who has been in power for the last 50 years in Texas?
Well, Republicans, just so you know, understand your history, Texas became a red state around like 88. So it was mostly Democrats that built these. So it was Lyndon Baines Johnson that was a Democrat.
Daddy.
And Kay Bailey.
Daddy.
Wait, it's
Wait,
funny.
Lyndon
So
Baines
by the way, so what did he call the Great Society Act since you call him Daddy? He called it he called it the N-word bill. He was a bitter and committed racist.
I know he was a racist, but we still got these things through.
You mean the things that kept Black America permanently poor and kept an entire part of the American population without hope? That's something you're proud of?
I'm not an African American person, so I can't speak on that behalf.
But you can
And
look
I
at
don't think you are
data.
either.
What other buzzwords
I don't think
do
you
you
are
know?
either, so I don't know if you can speak
But I
on
mean,
that.
like what data do you have to argue
You can go to
that?
the library.
And here we go. The conversation takes on an even more interesting turn. Charlie Kirk is now diving into the real heart of the issue: welfare programs and their unintended consequences. The moment he mentions $22 trillion spent on attempts to address poverty, you can almost hear the collective eye roll from the left to the right. The question, of course, is whether all that spending has actually even at any point helped the communities it was meant to support, or as Kirk argues, if it has merely reinforced cycles of dependency and broken family structures. Let's break this down very quick, because it's not just my opinion, it's a matter of the numbers. The US government has indeed spent enormous amounts of money on welfare programs, with a huge portion directed towards programs of low-income families, including food assistance, housing subsidies, and direct cash transfers. The $22 trillion figure Kirk mentions comes from various studies looking at the total amount of federal and state spending on welfare since the 1960s. And yet, despite all this spending, poverty rates have remained stubbornly high, especially among African Americans and Native Americans. But here's where the debate gets tricky. It's not all about that welfare programs are bad. Many are essential for those facing extreme hardships. However, Kirk's argument is that these programs, particularly the way they have been structured, may have inadvertently encouraged a culture of single motherhood and dependency. For example, during the 1960s and 1970s, welfare policies sometimes penalized families if a father was present in the home. Essentially, if a single mother wanted to receive benefits, she had to be unmarried. This created its disincentive for family cohesion, especially in low-income communities. Now, to be fair, this isn't some magical conspiracy, it's a well-documented issue. Economists have long argued that when you financially incentivize single-parent households, you may actually be worsening the long-term economic outlook for those families. In effect, a study from the National Bureau of Economic Research found out that policies encouraging single-parent families may have contributed to the rise in single motherhood in low-income communities. And as Charlie points out correctly, the increase in single motherhood, especially in the black community, has skyrocketed over the past few decades. The black single motherhood rate from 22% in 1964 is now a staggering 74% as 2024. But here's where it gets very interesting. While welfare policies may have contributed to the rise, there's no denying that other factors also are in play. Economic instability, the decline of manufacturing jobs, and rising incarceration rates have all played significant roles in destabilizing families, particularly in black communities. And before anyone gets too excited about calling everyone a welfare problem, let's remember that these issues have a deep historical root, from slavery to Jim Crow to redlining finally. These weren't problems created by well-meaning social safety nets, they were created by systematic oppression that has persisted for generations. Kirk's critique here is that these programs were never designed to solve the root causes of poverty for family breakdown, they were designed to treat the symptoms. The problem, as he sees it, is that by focusing on financial assistance alone, these programs ignored the importance of strong family units and community cohesion. If we look at the data, one of the biggest predictors of success of a child growing up in a household with both parents present. The evidence is very clear. Children from two-parent households are less likely to drop out of school, commit crimes, or end up in poverty. But here's the twist. It's not just about the family structure. No, it's about the role of the culture that Kirk points out that Asian Americans and Indian Americans especially tend to have higher family stability and more focused educational outcomes. So while we can talk all day about policy failures, there's something to be said for the cultural values, play a heavy emphasis on education and family. For example, Asian immigrants' families are often culturally predisposed to prioritize education above everything else in their life. This isn't just a coincidence, it's a cultural norm that has direct impact on success rates. Education, hard work and family stability can be found in any immigrant community, often to the exclusion of government assistance. And that's where the rub comes in. It's easy to dismiss people's success as a result of some systematic advantage when the real answer lies in personal responsibility, education and community. Yes, systemic racism and discrimination have undoubtedly affected many communities, especially African Americans, but to ignore the role of family structure, education and cultural values in shaping success is frankly short-sighted. In the end, Kirk's argument is that the government's well-meaning policies to lift people out of poverty have in many ways backfired. Instead of fostering independence, they may have fostered dependence. But here's the key point. Fixing these issues isn't about throwing more money at it. It's about looking at the root causes, broken families, lack of education, and yes, a culture that may have drifted away from the values that promote long-term success. So before we start blaming everything on the system, let's acknowledge that some of these issues are more complicated than just money and policy, for the matter of fact. If we are serious about lifting communities out of poverty, we've got to start thinking about solutions that go beyond government checks and start focusing on what truly builds a successful and thriving family and also a community.
Listen to me, Republicans, listen! You are the people in history they warned us about! They warned us about people like you! Pay attention! We're losing our democracy! Wake up! Wake up!
Alright, let's wrap this up with a dash of humor. You know, sometimes I can't help but picture the Democrats watching this debate and, like that one viral meme, just standing there shouting, "Listen to me, Republicans, listen! You are the people in history they warned us about." Like it's some kind of apocalyptic warning. But hey, let's keep the memes coming, because they are the only thing we can all agree on. See you in the next video, and do not forget to support this channel with a short comment and like, and then we'll see each other tomorrow.